The strategies and concepts discussed are for educational purposes only and do not represent specific investment, tax, or estate planning advice. Investing carries an inherent element of risk, and it is in everyone's best interest to consult a tax, legal, or investment professional. John Cyndia is an investment advisor representative of, and advisory services are offered through USA Financial Securities Corp., member FINRA SIPC, a registered investment advisor. Life Stages Advisory, Dean, Remington, and Danielle are not affiliated with USA Financial Securities. Welcome to episode 26 of WTF, Wealth, Taxes, and Finances. I'm your host, John Cyndia, certified public accountant and personal financial specialist. Today we're going to talk about planning for long-term care. We have, again, in the studio here, we have Danielle Frye from the firm of Krugliak, Wilkins, Griffiths and Doughtery. I got it right that time.
Spot on.
And Dean is also in. Dean's got a couple of questions today. And Dean's a millennial, yet there are some things that Danielle is going to be able to give as far as advice and some suggestions to millennials, maybe a little bit older, pushing the late 20s when we want to start doing some of this stuff. But it's not going to hurt to at least get that into the mindset and start having some discussions. So Danielle, tell me a little bit about what long-term care planning is and maybe even isn't, and the planning versus a last-minute situation, because I know you probably get a lot, as I do, people have already done certain things with no planning, and then it's last minute, somebody just went in, or they're going in next week, or they've been in a week, and now I've got to do stuff, and can I hide this? Can I give it away? What can I do? What can I do? So tell me a little bit about what planning is, and we can drift down into if they didn't do anything, what can they do?
Yeah. So long-term care planning in a broad general sense is planning in the event you need to go into some type of long-term care facility during your lifetime, and attempting to protect assets that you have developed, obviously, as part of your life, an attempt to make sure that at least something ends up passing to your beneficiaries. It basically, comes in two, I guess, forms. There's the planning that you can do ahead of time, and what I mean by ahead of time is typically that the perfect time frame is 5 years, because we have the 5-year look back rule. Mm-hmm. But there also is, for lack of a better term, the crisis planning. So the planning, I just got a diagnosis, I have to go into a facility, maybe within 6 months, or I'm admitted now, what do I do? Mm-hmm. And there's always planning that can be done. So in that situation, if you're doing the crisis planning, the most important thing you can do is go see an attorney that specializes in the area of elder law. And I specifically want to stress that because, attorneys, once they're licensed, can typically practice any type of law that they want. But elder law is so specialized. The rules update basically every 6 months, and there's constantly changes. And so you want an attorney that knows the law, and can specifically look at your set of facts and generate the best type of plan. And then that's typically an attorney that specializes their practice in elder law planning. There are certifications for elder law attorneys. So if you want to make sure that you're getting a good firm or a good attorney, look for those qualifications. Another part of the planning, and we talked about this a little bit during the last session, is making sure that you have powers of attorney in place. Because even if for a millennial, for example, or somebody who's about retirement age, or what have you, if there's not a plan to go into a skilled nursing facility or have to go into long-term care, you want to make sure that there's at least a document in place that would allow somebody to do that type of planning for you in the event you become unable to do those types of things yourself. So that I would say that's the most important document that you can have as far as long-term care planning. It's very complex, and honestly, the planning, it looks different for every individual, because every individual has different types of assets. Some people are married, some aren't, and so there's different planning opportunities there. And so that's why I would stress, the social workers at the facilities or at the hospital do try and help out, and they have a good general sense, but it definitely is worth seeing an attorney for.
Okay. Yeah, I know Danielle's been helping my family with our mother. She had, she was hospitalized for a while, and then we had to go in for rehab for the facility. And now we're just hopefully stepping down into the assisted part, because the average in Ohio is pretty much where she's at. It's about $7,000 a month, about $84,000 a year. So when you start looking at that and at different levels of care and where you're going, it can actually go up from there. And we've had some clients that are paying $10,000, $12,000 a month. So you're looking at $120,000, $144,000 a year. So it can be very expensive. And when you look at the long-term care side that we've handled, for years there has been the normal long-term care policy that you pay monthly premiums to. And the only issues I've had with those is that a lot of the companies, it used to be dozens of them, and now you're really down to only about 2 or 3 different ones that are competent to deal with anything, because the actuarial assumptions have been so messed up that when these came out and the companies were doing these 25 years ago, they would turn around and say, oh, okay, well, it looks pretty good. Those are guaranteed for life. And within 3 to 5 years, they had doubled and tripled. And now all of a sudden, somebody may have, somebody may have 5 to 10 years of premiums in. And that's why a lot of people look at it and go, geez, that long-term care stuff is terrible. You know, you can pay $50,000, $60,000 and it's worthless. Well, if you get a policy, and even if they happened to have a monthly or an annual premium type policy, and you paid it for 10 or 15 years and you had $50,000 into it, you look at it today, that's only 7 months of care. So regardless of how bad that is, it could still be a good thing. We happen to deal with some of the clients that have a higher net worth, and we do a lot of asset-based. And it works out really well because you've got a death benefit. If they're doing it, there again, you can't do it at the last minute. But if we have some planning involved, we'll turn around and we'll get a nice death benefit. It's usually twice the death benefit is what you get in long-term care proceeds. And if you don't use that, it almost works like a CD. You might get 3% onto that. And if you want to, you can actually claw that back and get some of that back. So it's very versatile. We've had probably a couple of dozen people just in the last 2 years that we've placed policies like that with. And I think it's a very good thing. But there again, you have to go through and make sure that you've got the assets, you've got the cash flow. And once you start those, you want to maintain those. It's not something that you want to just go ahead and buy something and then say, well, geez, I need a life policy, I need this. These hybrid policies, what they call them, have both contained in there. And if you've got something that's flexible, you've got a good, strong single or double A rated insurance company, for the most part, you're going to be pretty good. And like I say, there's only a handful. There's, I think, less than 5 now that really even work with from that standpoint. Danielle, the other thing that people get, we notice that people get mixed up is Medicare and Medicaid. Tell me a little bit about that. Usually it's the Medicare situation that hits first, like with my mom. They've got so many days that they're in somewhere, they have to be referred back over and all that stuff. Can you clarify that?
Yeah, so the main difference between Medicare and Medicaid is that Medicare is not needs-based and that it doesn't look at your income and resources, whereas Medicaid does. So Medicare, you can qualify if you're over the age of 65 or if you're under the age of 65 and have a disability. And so a lot of times the Medicare is linked with the benefit SSDI, not SSI. Okay. Medicaid is linked to the SSI benefit. And so once you receive SSDI for 2 years, then you're eligible to receive Medicare if you're under the age of 65. And then obviously, once you've reached the age of 65, you can be eligible. And so Medicare does cover some, long-term care related things. It will, cover some costs at the hospital and that type of thing. But typically, once that's kicked off, and so they're no longer covering for the certain period of days, you either are self-pay, meaning that it's coming out of pocket, or you have to have some other type of benefit to come in, and that's where the Medicaid benefits can be extremely helpful. But it's a lot more difficult to meet the qualifications for Medicaid because they look at a lot of different areas to make sure that you're eligible. And whereas Medicare isn't as difficult.
And most everybody thinks that on Medicaid you almost have to be destitute, but there are some planning tips that you can do. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and so I'll refer back to the 5-year planning. So Medicaid will look at, if you're attempting to qualify, we'll look at your assets, so your resources, what you own, and as well as your income. And so if you're a single individual and you would like to qualify for Medicaid, your asset level, your resources have to be below $2,000, $2,000 or below. And so that's why, people get that idea why I basically can't own anything. But there's planning that can be done ahead of time. And it's a little bit more flexible when you have a spouse that if you're going into a long-term care facility and your spouse is remaining home, they're permitted to keep the house, to keep a vehicle,
okay,
and a certain amount of the assets. So the planning that can be done ahead of time is the 5-year planning. I keep referring to that, and I'll explain a little bit, but it's essentially gifting assets out of your name, hopefully making it the 5 years until you have to apply for Medicaid or go into a long-term care facility. And so technically that can be just gifting to a child or, an individual without any type of protective vehicle. So if I wanted to qualify for Medicaid in 5 years, I could gift all of my assets, away. And then those would not be owned by me for purposes of Medicaid eligibility. A lot of times the planning that we'll do involves an irrevocable trust. And so an irrevocable trust is a little bit different than a revocable trust, which you would use for typical probate avoidance and estate planning. You can have both, but an irrevocable trust typically has a specific purpose. And in this instance, it is to do some asset protection planning. So a lot of our clients, they'll have a certain asset, maybe it's a stock account or, an investment account, something that they're comfortable setting aside, saying, if I don't have access to this, I'm comfortable giving up control. And so they'll take that asset and gift it into an irrevocable trust. And we'll structure the trust such that their children, let's say there's 2 children in this situation, they're co-trustees of the trust. And so they'll be responsible for administering the trust, making sure that the assets are invested and that type of thing, paying, figuring out the income tax returns, all of that. But they're also the beneficiaries. So the children would be permitted to make distributions out to themselves, during the 5 years or after. But those assets are set aside, and it's essentially the same as gifting it to your children outright, except it allows for some protection. For example, if one of the children were to run into a creditor issue or even a divorce, anything that's in that trust, even though they're the beneficiary and the trustee, we structure it such that they don't have absolute control over the assets, which means it would not be subject to their creditors or subject to division in the event of a divorce.
Okay.
That's specifically for Ohio. I'm sure states have different laws as it relates to assets for divorce purposes, but it provides that protection. And it kind of puts a protective bubble around it such that the children understand, this is here, but it's really just to set aside for mom and dad or whomever they're doing the planning for, at least until they pass away. And what's nice is whatever's in that trust avoids probate because it's owned by a trust. There's a contractual arrangement. And so there isn't a need to probate it after the death of the person that created it.
Dean, I guess one of the other questions that I missed earlier was back on the long-term care side, before we get into the Medicaid, is, and Danielle, you can answer this. You're what, 22?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We haven't had any clients, usually our clients that come in that have decent, they have a decent income that they can afford buying the long-term care on the monthly or on the annual premiums. And they're usually probably in their 50s, okay? Now, Dean's 22, and we haven't quoted anything that early. Danielle was saying that, it's probably not a bad thing to consider, or at least be aware of it. And, you would be in on that low end. And like I said before, if somebody else had it and they were paying $50,000, like $5,000 a year for 10 years, that's $50,000, but it's only 6 months of cost. Hopefully nothing's going to happen for several years, but if you can lock that in, it might be a really good move. And I haven't checked on those annual premiums lately, but I think there's some of them that are like 10 and 15, 20 years that you can get paid up.
Right.
So once you have those, it could be a very cheap way to protect yourself, and you don't have to pay in anymore. Is that?
Yeah. So it's definitely always something to consider, and I think we were talking earlier, there's some, life insurance policies where you can add like a long-term care rider, that type of thing. So it's definitely something to be aware of. Long-term care insurance, a lot of times they'll structure the policies now such that they pay out for 3 to 5 years. And the reason they're structured that way is they pay out so that you can do the 5-year planning. So the insurance steps in and covers the cost of care while you're in the facility for the first 3 to 5 years, which would allow you to do planning with your other assets during that time, because you can take what you're receiving from the policy plus your income and be able to afford it, kind of like you were saying. And so it is a really great way. Obviously, the premiums are a lot cheaper or more affordable with younger individuals. Once you reach that certain age, the premiums just aren't affordable for a lot of people.
Right.
But it's definitely, the one thing that you could even consider doing now as a young person would be to look into those policies.
You bring that up about the 3 to 5 years. What I was looking at it from a different aspect is the fact that the normal institutionalization of an individual usually lasts from about 36 to 42 months. So it's a little over 3 years, but it's a unique thing that you're saying if it goes out and we get it covered for the 5, having that trigger to get us a gifting situation first, paying that 5 years. At the end of that time, everything should be free and done, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now if the people live past that, then we don't have the long-term care, but then would they have to pay out, but then they could go in, what would they qualify for at that point?
Hopefully at that point, if the gifting was done correctly, they could qualify for Medicaid. And so that's when Medicaid steps in and starts, paying the cost of
So even though
care.
they've got the other assets and everything else.
Yeah, because they've made it the 5 years. Medicaid only looks back 5 years. At least that's what it is now.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that could change.
Sure. I've heard some rumblings of 10 years on certain things, but I'm not sure, hopefully it doesn't trigger.
Yeah.
But and the thing is that what we've done on some of these policies, either because we've had some cases of people who are in their late 50s, but they have certain conditions that once that triggers, they're going to be in a long-term care facility. And if they've got dementia, my grandmother was in a nursing home for 11 years, and she had railroad retirement that paid her, and she was in, the Medicaid took care of everything over and above that, but she was there 11 years. So there are riders on there, and we've switched the premiums on some of these asset-based types of policies, so where they can get an unlimited for their life, those payments. So if they were in there for 10, 15, say somebody was in there 20 years, they would still pay, and it was a one-time fee that they put in. So they're very unique. They're very I think they're a great vehicle, especially if you've got someone that has the ability and the assets and the wherewithal to be able to set something up and pay like that. What do you think? Do you think that's something you'd be interested in, or what?
Maybe not just yet. I think.
Where's your notepad? You
Yeah,
need
yeah,
notes from the last one here.
Yeah, I need to write more down. But
Don't plan on needing this for like 60 years.
I think one question is, this is all really good information because, you might not, like I might not be involved in it for myself personally for a long time, but my parents could be
Exactly.
in the next 20 or 30 years. And I could be, a part of planning and helping plan out all of this stuff. So it's good information. But I think one question I had is, you guys are both saying that the proper time obviously would be the sooner the better, but usually in your early 50s would be a time when you would start considering this more heavily than, in your late 20s or early 30s.
Yeah, unless you've got some medical condition or something like that.
So my question is when you get into your early 50s and you start deciding to start planning for this, ballpark how much money you would be spending per month on a premium to set yourself up correctly. I think it might depend on, that person's assets and their incomes, but, just a ballpark number. Are you spending a ton of money on this? Is
on
it
the
a
premiums?
little bit?
Yeah, on the premiums, what I've seen when we've quoted them, and I have quoted them, but I haven't placed any. It's usually because the asset kicked in. The people enjoyed that more than the premium. But you can be somewhere on an individual, probably somewhere about 2,000 to maybe 4,000 in that area, annual. Okay, so that's an annual premium. And then it goes from there depending on, it almost works like a disability policy, whereas you've got 90 days or 180 days or 360 till that kicks in or whatever, okay? So the longer you wait and pay out of pocket, then the premium goes down because you're not kicking that in right away.
Right.
So you can I don't want to say manipulate, but you can plan on these figures and get the premiums down to whatever you think you have. So we've got some people that, if they've got the money and they say, yeah, we can hang on for 6 months, and they've got still have substantial assets. Now it would be a situation that I would think that instead of these policies going in with 36 to 48, it's like, can we up that to 60 months? And then just put maybe a month or two, let them pay for it, and just to buffer that, because I always don't like 60 months. I'd like 61 or 62. We're going to overlap a little bit, just like insurance policies. Somebody cuts it off at this day and then they miss it by a day because they didn't realize it was midnight of the day before. And we always used to overlap whenever we did that. But the thing is that that way you're at least have that 5 years. You can do all this planning. And that was something, as much as I've done this, I just never thought about that because we were looking at it from the one area of how long is that going to have to last. But to put that into perspective with, the planning side and really gifting that out there, geez, that's crazy cool.
Yeah.
Is that a technical term, crazy cool?
Crazy cool.
Yeah,
we'll make it one.
Okay. That's long-term crazy cool planning. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. As far as, you mentioned a little bit on the asset protection. What other items might they do into this gifting side? Because I think a lot of people say, yeah, if we gift that, it's out of our hair. They think it's still 3 years instead of the 5-year look back, and what they can do. And what would happen if they did that and the person died in 2 years? I mean, I've had people say, they got to catch me and all this other stuff. Is there a way, or is it just strictly resources? And if the government's got resources, they'll find it. And if they don't, they won't. I mean, the people are they're playing with fire, I think, from that standpoint.
So are you basically saying if somebody's gifted, but then they don't want to be open about the fact that they've gifted to Medicaid when they're going to qualify?
Kind of, sort of.
Yeah, it happens. The problem is that Medicaid can request statements from all of your accounts back 5 years. And so you can, maybe, I had it in cash. I mean, it just does not make sense in this type of situation to lie or not be forthcoming. And so we basically will include, that in our engagement letter that, you need to be upfront with us.
You got to come clean.
We need to know so that it doesn't surprise us when we're actually, they're trying to get you meeting with the caseworker and trying to get you qualified. So it's definitely a lot better to just be upfront. There's things that can be done. So say you have made a gift and you need to qualify, but it's within the 5 years, the gift can be cured. So it can be gifted back. There's things that can be done to address those situations. There's always, ways to get around. Sure, it might not be as beneficial of an outcome, had it not been brought to everyone's attention, but there is, and so we'll talk a little bit. Let's say I needed to qualify for Medicaid tomorrow. There is planning that can be done. There's a special type of trust in Ohio that can be created. It's called a pooled trust, like a swimming pool, POOLED. And it basically allows individuals to gift assets into a trust that's administered by a foundation as the trustee. And so basically, even though you don't have millions of dollars, all of the individuals that are gifting to this trust, their investments are being, invested together. And so it has a pretty good rate of return. It did before. Right now everything's kind of up in the air. But so I could technically gift all of my assets to this type of trust and qualify for Medicaid tomorrow, because that type of trust, the gift to that is exempt. But the downfall is that anything that's left in that trust when I pass away will be subject to Medicaid estate recovery. And so that's a good thing to be aware of as well. Anything that you own individually when you pass away, if you receive Medicaid benefits, that is subject to Medicaid estate recovery. And so Medicaid can come back, the state can come back and say, well, we paid this much for your care. We're going to be reimbursed based on what you owned when you passed away.
So instead of spending it down up front and waiting to have Medicaid take over in 3 years, you can do it now. But if you were there 4 years and only had 3 years of assets, they would come and get those 3 years for reimbursement.
Right. And so let's say, and we this is like a quasi type of planning. We do this sometimes where we gift some assets to the irrevocable 5-year trust, and then we gift some assets to the pooled trust. And we use the assets that are in the pooled trust to get us past the penalty period for what's been gifted to the irrevocable 5-year trust.
Okay.
You use that for your care, whatever your income is not covering, you can use what's in the pooled trust to pay for the remainder, because what's in the pooled trust can be used for your benefit. And so the plan there is we do the calculation, we figure out, okay, we've gifted this much to the pooled trust because we need this much each month to get you past that penalty period. And so whatever is in that trust will essentially be gone by the time you've made it past the penalty period. So there is some planning options there. It's very specialized, so it really just depends on the specific facts and circumstances for each person.
And that pooled trust would act almost like that long-term care policy. I'm assuming they didn't have that for the 5 years.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. In that situation, if somebody has long-term care planning insurance, it does open up a lot of planning options, because we know that we have that to fall back on.
Okay. All right, that's cool. Yeah, we do something similar with the retirement planning. We consider it a wasting asset that we'll put in there and get them through. So maybe it's going to be for the first 3 to 5 years, and we'll use all those, and then let everything else grow and mature and everything. So, well, any last thoughts, Dean?
No,
you have?
No, I got nothing else. It's another law school course, though. Another.
Well, you're through your sophomore year right now in law school.
Yeah, it was free too. Yeah, I'm more excited about that. No,
I haven't sent in my bill yet.
Yeah. Oh, great.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, great. See, everybody listening is gonna get a bill too.
Exactly.
No, this is all great information. I'm glad I could be a part of this.
Well, as always, we want to thank Danielle and Dean and Rem behind the camera. He's feeling a little under the weather today, but he'll be back in a future episode, I'm sure. Thanks again for listening. I hope everything was informative for everybody. And please get back to us on our email, jcindy@lifestagesadvisory.com, or either one of the websites, lifestagesadvisory.com, www, I can't think what that is, or the tax website. And like us, love us, do whatever you have to. Subscribe, yeah. Follow, thumbs up, whatever it is. And give us, we want feedback, okay? We want feedback. I'm enticing everybody with books, anything else I can get you in here to tell your friends about or whatever. This is going to happen, okay? So we're doing it now. Danielle, thanks again. Dean, Rem, till next time, thanks everybody.